without further ado, let me introduce our team who is joining us on our webinar today. So my name's Gordon. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor. I'm joined by Paula, who is our senior trip specialist, and many of you will have spoken with Paula on the phone if you've called in before. And in the background, we've got as well Joel Curry, who is our co-founder and does our technical support and puts all these beautiful webinars together. So our journey today is a virtual one where we're going to look at this wonderful country of Japan, and where we're planning to go in May of 2023. I just wanted to look back, share with you a couple of images from our last trip to Japan, which is all the way back actually it says 2020, but it was actually 2019 when we were there. Sorry, no, it wasn't. It was, my goodness, you know, what COVID ruins your memory in terms of what happened when. It was in May of 2019. It was the same time. So it will have been 4 years since we went to Japan. We had a marvelous time. We had a great size group. And the thing that made it fun is that, you know, and that's what I think is particularly special about us is that, you know, everybody has this desire to sort of immerse themselves in what's in the culture and what's going on, and you know, by putting on the kimonos or the yukatas for the men, and you know, we did a sushi making course like you can see here, and so everybody gets involved. And we have a great time. We have lots of laughs along the way. This is at a tea ceremony that we did in Kyoto. So a lot of fun is always had by all, and we're anxious to go. And I had a lot of members asking about this program. So let's go into it in detail. And just to give you the overview, how we created this program, we actually are almost following in our footsteps from when we went a couple of years ago. Why? Because I think it covered a great swath of Japan, both the big cities like Tokyo and Kyoto, but we also saw some of the forested, the wonderful nature in the Nagano region, which is to the east and north of Tokyo. So we get really a nice mix, because we often don't realize how much incredible nature that there is in Japan. Okay, great. Thanks, Paula, for that. So as I say, we get a good mix between city and the countryside, which I think makes our experiences very, very special. Let's look at the map of where we're planning to go. So our trip is going to start out in Tokyo. So this is obviously the biggest city, well known to all. We can fly into Narita Airport, or hopefully they're going to resume flights into the Haneda Airport as well, which is closer to the city center. But of course, trans-Pacific flights are still not back to where they were before the pandemic began. So we'll have to see how that evolves over time. But either way, we're going to start with a few days in this massive city. I'll tell you about a little bit more in a second. We're then going to go overland by coach or minibus up into as I say, the Nagano region, up into the Gifa prefecture, visiting places like Suwa, Matsumoto, Takayama. Then we're going to hit a mid-sized city in Japan called Kanazawa, the home of the samurai. We're going to then take our first leg by train down to Kyoto, which is more in the middle of the main island of Japan. From there, we'll do a bullet train day tour all the way down to Hiroshima and back, and as well as visiting the magnificent temple of Nara. And then we'll take a bullet train back to Tokyo for our flight, either back home or to one of our extension destinations. So let's go through the program day by day. As I say, we're going to arrive first into this incredibly huge city of Tokyo, where we're going to spend 3 nights in a very central location. And, you know, with Japan, it's like the culture shock, if you want to call it that, begins the moment that you land at the airport, because you'll see it is all of the hustle bustle that you imagined. And if you've traveled in Asia before, in one of the big Asian cities, you'll know exactly what I mean. But the thing that is particularly different about Japan and Tokyo that I find special is that, you know, how they call it, you know, the Switzerland of the Far East, because everything runs Absolutely, perfectly. It's organized. The streets are all clean. It is really a remarkable, remarkable urban experience. You get struck by the sheer density. When you think about our Canadian cities like Toronto, being the biggest one, and you arrive in Japan and the skyscrapers just go as far as you can see in every direction. And so this, dense population that Japan has, of course, has caused them to become one of the most innovative cultures in the world, because you have all these people living in a relatively small space. So there is a correlation between the density, the closeness that everybody lives in this environment, and the innovation that comes up out of it as a result of that. And you see that everything from, they have a tremendous infatuation with vending machines. You'll never see as many vending machines as you do in Japan, and you can buy virtually everything out of a vending machine. So when we arrive into Tokyo, as I say, we'll have some time to stretch, relax. We never like to start too quickly on our trips on the first day, because obviously it's a long journey over from Canada, and we'll have time to sort of wander around on our own. The beautiful thing about Japan as well is that it's completely safe. So you can go out and about and wander around, and even if you get lost, which is possible, and at some level I almost recommend it. I mean, not too lost, but in Japan the people are so friendly and they want to help, even if they don't speak much English on the street. You might not find somebody who's readily able to communicate with you like you would if you were traveling in Europe. Some of the things that we're going to see while we spend our time in Japan, in Tokyo, we're going to obviously be visiting a number of different temples. And of course, Japanese religion is sort of divided by primarily the primary religion being Shinto and alternatively Buddhist, or some hybrid, or a lot of people practice both. And so we get a glimpse into what that world is all about and how it sort of shapes Japanese culture, which is, it's very rigid, as we all know. And this is sort of some of the sideline things we learn along the way from our guides, is about, how they're a very insular society. For a long time, it was very difficult to move to Japan. Even if you moved into Japan, it was very difficult. It's difficult for people to be accepted into modern society. I remember one of our guides from the last trip was a young chap who was born Japanese, but lived most of his life in New York and then returned back. And he said to us in the group how difficult it was, even as a Japanese, ethnic Japanese person, integrating into society was quite a challenge. So as I say, we're going to visit a number of temples. We're going to do some sushi making, particularly at the Tsuki outer market. This is this very, very famous fish market that, if you follow the news at all, was recently relocated from its historical place in the center of Tokyo to a new location. But it is one of the most famous in the world. And simply roaming around and looking at the array of fish and seafood, you won't believe your eyes. It's quite an amazing experience. And of course, to get involved in some sushi making and so on while we're there is part of the fun and part of understanding with the origins of what has become such a ubiquitous cuisine here, and how to properly eat sushi, because most of us do it wrong, quite frankly. But anyway, I'll save that for the trip. We'll also take a trip outside of Tokyo a little bit, and this is to a little seaside, I want to call it a village, but it's more of a small city called Kamakura. And you can see here that if the weather's really clear, you can actually already see the snow-capped Mount Fuji at this point. And all of a sudden, we learn a little bit what it's like to be out in the countryside around Tokyo. This particular town is famous for a place called Komachi Street. That's where in one of the previous pictures you saw, we all got to, or not all, but those that wished. There's nothing obligatory on any of our trips, but those that wish could don a kimono or a yukata for the gentlemen. And we actually spent part of the day in this town walking around dressed up like this. A lot of laughs, a lot of fun, but again, you get an appreciation for this deep, deep tradition and culture by learning about not just dressing up for fun, but what it meant and what it still means their traditional dress here. All in all, this is a lovely town. I'm hoping we're going to hit up the same Italian restaurant for lunch. I know it sounds funny to say Italian restaurant in Japan, but one of the things that we did on this trip, on this upcoming trip, is we had a lot of Japanese meals the last time. And, it's always fun and great to try different cuisines when we're traveling around the world. But, the feedback that we got was, might be a bit too much. So we're going to be enjoying a little bit of international cuisine along the way, which I'm sure that you will appreciate. So we'll head back for another night in Tokyo before packing up and heading off into the countryside. And on our first day, we're going to be heading out up towards Suwa, and we're going to pass Mount Fuji. And if the weather is good, we will drive up partway up the mountain. We won't have a chance to actually climb the mountain. That's quite an ordeal, but we'll drive up to what's called the fifth station, where we'll be able to have a glimpse and look up to the summit of the mountain. In fact, if the weather's good, we'll be able to see it as we drive up and then past it and on to our destination, Suwa. One of the interesting things as well on this day that we, it was in the itinerary from the last time, and I didn't really think too much about it, but there is an open air museum called Hakone which is at the foothills at the base of Mount Fuji. And it was probably the most incredible sculpture park I've ever seen. And I've seen some pretty amazing ones. Works from, Henry Moore, Picasso, this collection that was just remarkable that none of us expected to see it. And this is one of the little surprises, not so much a surprise now that I'm telling you, but that we get to do along the way that, again, really open your eyes because, while, as I say, it's a very insular culture, at the same time, they do appreciate and adopt and bring in, artwork and bits of culture from other places along the way. So in the evening, we're going to arrive at our first ryokan. We're going to spend the first night when we get to Suwa in a ryokan. And this is part of the experience of Japan, because the ryokan is an ancient form of accommodation. Nowadays, from the outside, they sort of look like regular hotels, but this is where you go in and the hotel room will have the beds on the floor, the mattresses, I should say, on the floor on these tatami mats that are typically made out of rice. The whole ryokan is organized around communal areas. So, of course, you have all of your guest rooms that you stay in, but the real focus is on community. I mean, these ryokans were the form of accommodation dating back to the 7th century. And so it's still very, very popular among Japanese culture. It's a bit different for us as Westerners coming into this environment. We have our private sphere, but of course, like most places in Japan, you have to take your shoes off at the door, and you really find yourself understanding a little bit the thinking, the mentality, and that's what I found interesting about staying at a ryokan. Part of what these ryokans also offer is the onsen experience. And onsen is a Japanese hot spring. And we'll have onsens at least 2 of our hotels during our stay here in the countryside in Japan. And, the onsen, again, is a very, very respected ritual in Japan. The one thing for Canadians who, if I may say so, tend to be a little on the prudish side, is that you can only enter the onsen if you are buck naked. They have a men's, they have a women's, completely separate, but at the same time, it is a 100% clothing not optional, no clothing allowed type of an experience. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you that because I think it's an important part. Of course, you don't have to go and try it, but I highly recommend it. We will visit Matsumoto after spending a night in Suwa. And I remember this castle because, this looks like the Japanese castle that you've probably seen in National Geographic. And we had a lot of fun here because you've got these local characters dressed up in the samurai. And this is where the part of the journey where we'll start to learn about the history of the samurai, because they weren't just soldiers with big knives cutting everybody up. There was actually a very respected institution in Japanese society. And so here they have these guys dressed as samurai, and they're sharing little bits of information about what it means and what it meant here in Matsumoto, and how the Zen and Buddhist cultures influenced samurai culture. And as we spend the next few days making our way up to Kanazawa, we'll hear more and more about the samurai culture. We're going to continue on, and then we're going to spend 2 nights here in Takayama. So now imagine we are pictured amongst the big, I wouldn't call them mountains, but they're certainly big hills. Imagine the Laurentians in Quebec, or in the hills in the interior of British Columbia. All tons of forests. You drive around, and you would never imagine that you're in Japan, because you're in the middle of wilderness, and it's really quite remarkable. And we arrive into Takayama. This is one of the sake centers of Japan. So we'll get a little bit of insight into how sake is made. We'll taste some different ones. We'll understand why cold sake is actually the appropriate way to drink it, even though we in the West are all familiar with our hot sake. And so again, it's an eye-opening experience. The other thing about this region of Takayama here, particularly the hotel we're staying, is they're famous for their Hida beef. So a lot of us have heard of Kobe beef. These are this beer-fed cows that are raised and, treated like they're at the Four Seasons. And you get this very expensive beef. Well, Hida beef is similar. It's like 1 notch below, if you will, but wow, it is incredible. And once again, we'll be staying at an onsen here that will give us the chance to experience the Japanese hot springs. While we're in this area, we're going to visit Shirakawago. This is a village where they have the original gas hoe houses. These houses covered in a thick, it's like a meter thick layer of grass on top. And what's really funny is, in Japan, smoking is still, it's quite a bad habit that they still have across Japan. And of course, in a place like this, because these things would go up in a heartbeat, but to see all the Japanese folks outside that are like kept outside because they have to have their cigarette before they go anywhere near these. Anyway, it's these little moments that we experience of how we observe how people behave compared to how we, look at things and move around and so on. That is what it makes touring Japan particularly special, because, although we're all human beings on the planet, they definitely behave and look at things in a very different way. And so when you visit a place like Shirakawago, and you understand a bit of the history and how things were in the rural part of Japan, it's really quite amazing. Also, in this area is where they do the washi, the Japanese paper making. And again, you can imagine you've seen those wonderful Japanese hand-painted murals that they do. And so we'll see the washi, the paper that it actually comes from. From here, we go again back out of the rural landscape, out of the mountains, up to Kanazawa. So now we are on like the north east coast of Japan. And Kanazawa, again, you probably wouldn't have heard of before. This is a medium-sized city, which again offers us a bit of a glimpse into the less touristed part of Japan, because of course everybody goes to Tokyo and Osaka and Kyoto and Hiroshima. But up here, we will see other tourists for sure, but we're going to be much more in sort of the middle of the real Japan, if you will. And we are situated here at a very centrally located hotel. Again, an improvement I made from our previous trip. We're going to spend a couple of nights here. They have this botanical garden called Kenrokuin. Kanazawa, though, is really, again, it was shaped by its samurai history. And so part of the time that we spend there is going into Nagamichi. This was a original samurai neighborhood where they used to live. We get a bit of an orientation and understanding, again, about the influence that these people had on Japanese culture back, a few centuries ago. One of the fun little activities, because we like to always do something with our hands whenever we have the chance, is we'll do a little chopstick making exercise. And this was, we had tons of laughs because we designed and created our own chopsticks, or the design on the chopsticks with gold leaf and all these other materials. And yeah, it just makes for a lot of fun. And again, when we all appreciate the meticulousness with which Japanese products and so on are made. And when you look at these little details, whether it's chopsticks or whether it's the ceramics or the washi paper, whatever it happens to be, you just get an appreciation of, the focus and the mental clarity that the Japanese have. It's really, really remarkable. So from Kanazawa, we'll then continue on to Kyoto. So we'll take our first train ride. We'll make our way out again through the mountains, and it will seem like an endless suburb because this part of Japan on Hokkaido on the main island is largely built up. So you pass through sort of city to the next town to the next city at the same time, interspersed with rice paddies everywhere. It's really quite remarkable. And one point I want to make here is, on our train trips, we send the luggage separately. So this is one of the things that enables us to enjoy the local experience, because I think traveling by train in Japan is a great way to do it. Traveling with your luggage, not so much. So we'll be sending the luggage on separately. In some cases, we actually have to get it ready the evening before so that it can be shipped on to our next stop. But of course, as everything in Japan, everything works perfectly. So after a couple of hours rail journey, we'll end up in Kyoto. And as before, we're going to spend a full 4 nights here. I think it's worth it. This city has so much to offer, both on the modern side, where we'll be staying in sort of the business heart, very close to the railway station. But interspersed around the city are all of these little parks with the shrines and temples, and we're going to see a few of them. So we'll have some time at leisure on our first day there. I know the last time we walked up the Kyoto Tower, which is quite we didn't walk up, we took the elevator up the Kyoto Tower, which is quite an experience for our members. And yeah, so we'll spend 4 nights in Kyoto. And on one of the days, we will head down to Nara, which is a little bit to the south of Kyoto. And Nara is famous not just for the deers that you see here. I mean, we're all sort of familiar with deers, but the Nara temple is one of the largest. It used to be the largest wooden building in the world. It is so impressive. Set amongst all of these parks and gardens, you have this amazing wooden structure with this giant Buddha in the middle of it. And we'll see a bunch of temples, but there's the ones that are particularly awe-inspiring. This is one of them. And again, what makes it kind of fun and why I put this picture with the deer on is because they are part of the how shall we say, they've been a part of this temple and this shrine and the monastery and so on that goes with it for a long, long time. And they're super friendly. I mean, there'll be tons of visitors there depending on the day of the week and so on and so forth. But the deer are just like part of, they come right up to you. You can even feed them. They sell food there. And so, we have a different relationship, I think, to deer in Canada than they do here. But I found it one of the experiences that our Canadian members really found quite endearing and special. We had quite a lovely day. On this day as well, we're going to head up to the Fujimi Inari shrine. This is the one where you have all of the red gates. You've probably seen it before. You'll know what I mean. It's actually on the front page of our brochure this year. There are literally thousands of them. And so you can walk all through this wonderful Japanese garden with these Inari gates. Really, really amazing. That'll be a very special day for us. From Kyoto as well, we're going to do a day trip to Hiroshima. So this will be our adventure on the bullet train. And the bullet train obviously is one of those things that you think about when you think about traveling to Japan. It was one of the fastest high-speed railways in the world, locally known as the Shinkansen. It goes 250 kilometers an hour. So it really bullets through the landscape. They're building even faster ones now. So we can get all the way down to Hiroshima in about 90 minutes. even though it is something like almost 400 kilometers away, and spend the day visiting this remarkable city that is set in a beautiful location on these inlets from the sea. And we all know what Hiroshima is famous for, and so the beginning part of our trip, we will actually take a cable car ride and look out over this sort of archipelago and these inland seas and waterways. It's really quite a majestic setting for the city. But of course, we're going to visit the Hiroshima Peace Museum and the shrine, and I won't go into it in depth, but these are one of these places that it's a very sobering moment to visit, because when you really look back and you can feel the energy of the tragic history that unfolded in Hiroshima at the end of World War II. So a very special place, a very special day that I'm sure remains in everybody's memories who was on our trip. We'll have another full day in Kyoto. Part of it we'll go and do some exploring around. We'll look for the so-called geisha district, which is called Gion. And of course, this is another very proud and longstanding tradition in Japan. We will do a special evening with a Maiko performance. So the Maiko are the Japanese ladies that dress up and practice the geisha profession, if you will. And of course, we as Westerners have a lot of misconceptions about what it means and what it was for, largely stemming from all of the stories that came out of the Korean War and so on, and how the geisha were sort of treated or how they were interacted with. And so again, it's a fascinating day and an evening where we get to spend some time, with a true Maiko, a geisha, and learn about her quest and why she decided to join this and become part of it. So anyway, I won't go into it in any more detail. That will effectively be our farewell evening. It'll be a very memorable one at that. And then from there, we'll make our way back to Tokyo, where we'll head off back to Canada, or we're just working on 2 extension programs, and I've racked my brain for quite a while on how to do this, because we visited Korea the last time and on a trip that I think was quite interesting. We're going to be doing it a little bit differently. We don't have the extensions completely finalized now, but I'm curious what our members think about extending for 5 nights in Seoul, South Korea, with another optional 5 nights in Taipei in Taiwan. The reason I'm planning to do it that way is because I think that, really the center of culture and getting to understand these countries and these cities is best done in the capital, in the main city. We could go on an extended tour around the countryside, but I think that you get the best bang for your buck by doing it this way. So that's what we're going to be proposing. If you're interested in joining us, we will have an extension to Seoul, South Korea, and then a further extension to Taipei, Taiwan, 5 nights each. And it'll be a bit more relaxing way than trying to sort of buzz around and see a whole bunch of countries. So that's the plan. If you have any feedback or comments on that, please do let me know. This trip, you'll find the details, of course, in the brochure that will get mailed out to you, together with a replay of this webinar. It's going to come in land only at about $68.90 per person based on double, and a bit more. The hotels are what makes a big part of the cost in Japan. So the single supplement is a little bit bigger on that one. That's unfortunately how much I can do about that. Of course, lots of inclusions on this program. We have at least 2 meals a day, in some cases 3. We've allowed for more Western meals on this trip, because although we appreciate sampling all the Japanese cuisine, I remember very well from the last time, some of it was a bit too much for some of our members. So we created a nice balance that gives you a chance to sample some of that. And of course, all of the transportation, our guiding, we're hoping to have David, the same guide we had the last time on our trip, and he was truly amazing and made it memorable. So the only thing that, as with all of our trips, that we don't include is our airfare. I'll touch on that in a second, as well as any additional pre or post tours that you're doing. And of course, travel insurance, that's so important in this day and age. Looking at the airfares, the trend right now is that airfares have gone up a little bit, particularly on long haul segments, because not all airline routes to Asia have been reinstated as of this time. We're hoping that in the not too distant future, they will have all the routes up and running, and that will have a stabilizing price on airfares. So this gives you a sense here based on economy class of what you're looking for at airfares to Japan. And yes, perhaps there'll be some questions about our program. And of course, if you don't get them answered now in our Q&A session, you are more than welcome to drop Paula or me a note and we will get back to you. So Paula, do we have any questions? I didn't see any come in the chat box. Is there anything on your end, questions that...
We have a couple that have come in over here. Someone was asking about the weather at this time of year.
I think May is the perfect time to go. So last time we were there, the weather ranged from the low 20s and it got as cool as, I don't think it dropped ever below about 14 or 15 degrees, a bit cooler in the mountains. But it's a perfect time. Generally, I mean, you can get some rain. It's springtime, but otherwise, weather-wise, it's a great time to go.
Perfect. Another question here was asking with regards to the accessibility for anyone that might have mobility, since we're utilizing, vehicle transfers, but also the trains. Can you touch on that and how active the days are?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, this is a relatively active program. That being said, we definitely had, a couple folks on our last trip who, definitely were a bit slower, let's say, than the rest of the group. So I think that, the more mobile you are, the more that you can obviously enjoy, because there are walking components. We go through some parks and so on, and there are steps up to the temples. So, you definitely need to be somewhat mobile to fully enjoy the trip. But at the same time, particularly if you're traveling with a traveling companion, they can help a little bit. I'd say it's well within reason. There's no hikes or super long walks, anything that you'd be missing out that you wouldn't be able to participate in. It's just that occasionally for those that, aren't interested or able to walk up long flights of stairs, we just arrange for them to meet us, at the beginning and the end of certain trips. So I think it's best for anyone that has a concern about that to speak to you directly or to me and get a sense of what's required.
Fantastic. A couple other questions. Someone was asking with regards to language, how easy is it to communicate? Like how widely spoken is English?
English is not widely spoken. So this is one of the things about Japan, and one of the things why, a lot of people will join a group like ours, because, it is a little bit tricky to navigate. I mean, English signs sometimes accompany Japanese signs with street signs and on the metro system and so on. But the average Japanese does not speak any English, or very little. And so, it just means one has to be a bit more mindful about, where you go. And I do recommend taking a mobile phone and getting a local SIM card so that you can have a translation app handy.
Fantastic. I think we've covered everything at the moment. Nothing else is coming in.
Well, I'm sure that there'll be more questions that you might have, and we're pleased to answer them. So please drop us a note. And we are now accepting bookings. So this is the official launch for the program. I do expect a full group. We'll probably be somewhere for around 16 to 18, which is about the ideal size for this trip. So that's what we're shooting for. So if you are interested, our demand is surging at the moment. If you've been waiting for our team to get back in touch with you. It's probably a good idea to sign on sooner than later. The extension programs, if you give us about 2 weeks, we should have them out, and we'll send them out to anybody that is interested in those. And I see, is there one more question there? Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Again, there's our contact information. Please join us on next Tuesday, which is going to be our first live away in Sicily, where I just returned from barely 2 weeks ago. So I look forward to sharing with you about our Sicily Part 1 live away that's going to be next March. Join us for that on Tuesday. And Paula has posted the link to that. Paula's posted the link to that in the chat box. Thank you again for joining us. It's great to see you all. And I'm sure I'll see some of you on our webinar on Tuesday about Sicily. And otherwise, take care, be well, and let's hope the weather keeps getting warmer.
Thank you again for joining us. And as I said before, if you do have any questions during the webinar, I will address them in the Q&A session towards the end. This won't be a super long webinar today. We'll probably be done in about 20 minutes or so. So just bear with me for any questions that you have about the trip. I'll just mention it briefly because this is sort of a special webinar, as we've already talked about the main program to Japan. But our philosophy at Wheel and Anchor is all about bringing travelers together, specifically Canadian travelers, people who have a bit of a like-minded approach to what travel is all about, and who sort of understand and appreciate what my vision is for travel, which is not just mine, but a collective vision. That is that we take a little bit more time to really soak in the places that we go, and the experiences and the cultures and the food and the wine and all those great things. And we make some great friends along the way. So that's our philosophy. Here's a quick shot from our last trip to Japan and Korea that happened obviously before the pandemic. And you can see this kind of fun that we have. And, most of the people, well, I shouldn't say that. In the meantime, a lot of people that come on our trips already know each other from either past trips or their friends that came on the trip because they talked their other friends to coming in on it. And, because it's a very relaxed vibe, we can sort of let our hair down sometimes, if you will, and dress up in kimonos like we did here outside of Tokyo in Japan. And that's part of the fun of it, because again, if you travel with a bunch of friends as opposed to just joining an ordinary tour group, it's a different experience, and invariably you become well connected to the people around you. And as I say, of course, the people that we meet along the way. So joining me on the webinar today, as usual, Paula, our senior trip specialist. Wave hello, Paula, so everybody knows who the face on the other end of the line when you're calling into our office. And of course, Joel, who does our technical support. And today, I'm going to be taking you, as many of you have obviously booked into our Japan trip, which is sold out for next year, in case you weren't already aware. It went amazingly fast. So if you're, however, I'll say this right now, if you haven't booked into Japan, and you thought, oh, now you're hearing me say that it's sold out. If you're still interested to go, we are building a wait list because we may put on a second departure. Because quite frankly, I didn't anticipate that it would sell out so quickly. So if that's the case, you just drop Paula a note and say, I still want to go to Japan, and we will see what happens over the next few weeks. Again, this webinar obviously is taking you on a little bit of a journey around Seoul, Korea, and Taipei, Taiwan, which are designed to be before and after our Japan program. However, of course, if you have you always wanted to visit these great cities or these countries and then go on and do something else in Asia, you're free to do that as well. So even though they're attached to Japan, they are mutually exclusive. So you can book them on their own. So just to let you know about that. So let's first of all talk about South Korea. As you know, South Korea sits on a peninsula adjacent to Japan, obviously with North Korea in between, and I'll talk about that in a second, and not far from Japan itself. And, Korea has a long and interesting history, and obviously the history since the Korean War is most interesting. The division between North and South, of course, we read about all the politics all the time, the tensions that exist there. And yet, people when you go to Korea, what the interesting thing that I find always is that the people are relatively chill about the whole thing. Everybody's aware of what's going on, and this is one of those opportunities to travel to a part of the world and really understand what the local mindset is and how people are relating to this situation, the geopolitics of the area. We're obviously focusing our trip here in Seoul. At one point, we were considering to do a broader trip around Korea, but I did a lot of thinking and a lot of searching, what would make the ideal itinerary. And quite frankly, what people most like about Seoul, and this is the feedback we got from the last time we went, is that about Korea in general, is that Seoul is really sort of so representative of the whole country. And of course, there's all kinds of other cities and towns that you can visit, and yet you get so much of what's there just by visiting the city. We will be staying right in Myeongdong, which is one of the most vibrant parts of Seoul. And obviously flying in from Canada, depending on where you're coming from, there's various routes that you can take. And there's direct flights from Toronto, Vancouver that you can get directly into Seoul. So it's pretty accessible. We will spend 5 nights, as I say, in Myeongdong. And from here, we'll explore different aspects of the city itself. There's a few of the labels that are on here. We will make a day trip up to the DMZ. That's the demilitarized zone, which is right the border basically between North and South Korea. Very eye-opening experience for people. And we'll obviously have time to take it in on our own. It's a vast city. And again, one of the things that's fascinating about Korea, South Korea, is how this country has gone from being, relatively poor. If we think about what Korea was some 40 years ago, it was sort of pre-industrialized. It was a lot of agricultural, and of course, the government made moves to put a tremendous amount of effort into the IT sector in particular, electronics, manufacturing. We are familiar with the automotive industry from there, companies like Hyundai, and it has just exploded, and done so in a very how shall I say, in a very social way, because there's so many things that underpin society there that, again, that's what makes it, I think, particularly interesting to visit. So we will arrive into Seoul, of course, because it's a long journey from Canada. We never plan anything the first day after a long trans-Pacific journey. We'll pick you up, we'll bring you to the hotel, which is a lovely boutique hotel. This is the other reason I wanted to design the trip this way, is check into a nice hotel, stay there for 5 nights. It just allows you to settle in and you're not in a rush to do stuff. I mean, we have a fairly full program, but once you get there, you're going to be anxious to get out and walk around. And because we're in Myeongdong, which is full of restaurants and cafes, it's sort of the neon light capital, like the Ginza in Tokyo. So there's lots of action going on. And yet we have this beautiful, 4-star boutique hotel in a great part of town to stay in. As I say, no big plans for the first evening. We'll then carry into I call it the touristy part of the tour. On the first day, we'll visit some of the highlights. In particular, you can't go to Seoul without visiting Gyeongbokgung Palace. That is the main imperial palace that is not that far from our hotel. Nothing is really that far from our hotel other than the airport, which is about an hour outside of town. And hopefully, if our timing is right, which I'm sure it will be, we'll take in the changing of the guard, and we'll see all the pomp and circumstance. And this will be an interesting preface to Japan, where, well, it's hard to even describe the cultural difference, the feel when you go, because Korea is a little bit more down and dirty than you'll find in Japan, right? I compare it to like Germany versus Switzerland kind of thing. That's, from a European perspective, that's how you might sort of compare the two. And so on our highlights day, as I say, we'll visit the palace, and we'll also go into Bokcheong Village, which I think is an interesting part of town because it's where we get to see a traditional Korean neighborhood, if you will, how the houses all look, how, in some ways they're certainly different in design and flavor from home. And there's a lot more detail put into the exterior, but at the same time, it feels very neighborhoody. It feels a little bit European or North American. And again, this is, I think, that's sort of a testament to Korea as it compares to, as we'll see when we look at Japan and Taiwan after that. Then, as I say, we'll make we'll spend a full half day or a better part of a half day up in the DMZ. What happens when we go up there is we take our own private coach up there, and then we are obliged to join sort of this public. Everything is quite tightly secured up there, and it's already fascinating as you're driving up along the Han River. And then at one point, you'll start to see the fortifications. And of course, the border between North and South Korea is one of the most heavily fortified in the world. You know, tons of barbed wire fence and, you know, tower guards. It's got a bit of an ominous feel to it. And so, you know, we'll drive and we'll approach this pavilion, the visitors pavilion, where we get registered, and we'll join then with the sort of official vehicles that take us to the various stops. There's a brand new observation center, which when you go to the top, you're literally peering over this valley and you're overlooking North Korea, and it's really quite fascinating. There's telescope, or like there's, you know, those like binocular telescope type things up there, so you can sort of look over at what's going on the other side. We'll also visit the so-called third tunnel, which is fascinating. You don't have to do this if you don't want. For those that are claustrophobic, it may not be so exciting, but you go down to where the North Koreans had about 30 years ago had dug a tunnel and tried to go underneath to be able to invade South Korea. And of course, they discovered this and now have turned it into a bit of a tourist attraction. But again, fascinating to see, you know, what all of the antics that have gone on, you know, over the years since the division of the two countries. We'll see the train station as well up there, where they still have the only place where the two countries are linked by rail. And again, I remember there's a great pavilion there that gives you sort of a little bit of the history as to all the things that happened along this border. So this is certainly an exciting day, and we will, you know, come back into town in the afternoon, and we have a little bit of more or less time every day when we are into Seoul to be able to look around, poke around on our own. And the nice thing about Seoul is that it has a very extensive and one of the most modern, clean, efficient transit systems in the world. It covers everywhere. So certainly I would take it upon myself, you know, if I'm going on this trip, to figure out some other parts of town to go in, because it's so spread over such a large area that you'll want to go out and venture around a little bit. And that's why we've organized the trip with time to do that. We'll spend another day to visit a bit more of the historic, the religious side. Of course, Korea being a center of Buddhism, we'll visit the Jogyesa Temple, which is basically the center of Korean Buddhism, and really fantastic. I don't put a lot of emphasis onto sort of the temples and the religious sites on these, because there's time for those that want to explore that to another level. But I think places like Jogyesa are really, really worth visiting, because you get to understand a little bit what differentiates the Buddhism in Korea from what we'll see in Japan, from what you might see in other places. We're also going to go along the Cheonggyecheon stream, which is what you see here. This is an 11-kilometer long sort of urban river. And I remember walking through this with our members the last time, and it's really because they've taken this, you know, what could otherwise be like a drainage basin, like a sewage basin, and they've turned it into, you know, an urban walkway. We're not going to walk along the whole 11 kilometers, although during the 3-day you might want to come and do that. And you can see what they've done. They've got, in some places, sculptures and various forms of, you know, public art. They've got landscaping in parts. It's really a cool thing that they've done to connect such a wide part of the city. From here, we're then going to go up the Namsan cable car, which goes to the base of Seoul Tower that we saw in an earlier picture. And here's when you'll really get that aerial view of the city, where you see how, you know, how spread out the city is. You can't even see to the edge of it in many directions. It's a vast city. And finally, we'll spend some time at the Guangzhon Market, which is the foodie part of this part of the tour, because you know, you can't go to a place like Korea and, you know, go and sample the street food. And because this is the time when the host whether it's me or one of my other hosts, and together with our local guide, we're going to encourage you to try this, try that, take a bite of things that you probably otherwise wouldn't order on your own in a restaurant, but you get a chance to sample some of the different textures and flavors and all those things that that make the food so great. And as I say, of course, there's a full day that's free. By this time, we'll have already been in Korea for 4 days. You'll be relaxed enough to know that the city is completely safe, to be able to go out on your own. You could go out to do a tea ceremony. You might go back out. They have a skyscraper on a different part of town, so ride the subway. They have a terrific, super modern library in one of the parts of town adjacent to the river. So many different things that you could do. And again, there's a whole day devoted to that before we have to say goodbye. And then from here, we'll then continue and fly from Seoul into Tokyo, Haneda, which is where we'll then join up with those who are going to come and just do Japan. So that's the Korea portion of the program. At the end of Japan is going to be Taiwan. And so I put these three together because I thought, what better way to sort of get this contrast between cultures, having Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, obviously Taiwan being the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China, as we all know what the politics are for that. And so you get to sort of compare how these cultures in some ways are similar, but in other ways are really completely different. So that's why I thought Taipei was a perfect thing to do after Japan. And so we will fly from Tokyo, where the Japan trip obviously ends, directly down to Taipei, the capital. Excuse me, the capital of Taiwan, which sits at the northern end of the island. The island of Taiwan, again, it practically gets lost on the global map because it's really roughly the size of Belgium. But Taiwan has 23 million people in it, so twice as many as there are in Belgium. And so on one hand, the cities, the whole western coast is quite densely populated, cities like Taipei and Kaohsiung, and it's practically one big city all the way down the west coast. But the east coast, on the other hand, is all mountainous and lots of nature. And when we take the train from Taipei down to Kaohsiung, we'll get a good sense of what the landscape of the country is like. So we're going to arrive into Taiwan, and we're staying here in the so-called Jinji part of Taiwan, which again is right downtown in the middle. It's the neighborhood is kind of known as the Manhattan of Taipei. This is where also Taipei 101, that big tall tower, is. And so we're going to check into a lovely, again, little boutique hotel called the Humble House Hotel. And again, this is the neighborhood here where Taipei 101 is, that we're going to be staying right in the heart of the city. And again, you'll find in some ways, you'll find similarities between Taipei and Tokyo or Kyoto and Seoul, because they're very modern cities. They're very clean. They're very efficient. But here you definitely feel a little bit of that, it's hard to even describe it. It has that more Chinese feel than the Japanese. The Japanese, again, that's like the Switzerland in this threesome of countries. But at the same time, Taipei is still just as safe as either Japan or Korea. So you can wander out from the hotel, be in the thick of everything, and not have any concerns at all. So by the time we check and arrive, again, no big plans for our first day when we get to Taipei, but we'll go out and have a traditional, very nice Taiwanese dinner. And then once again, in our program here, we're going to take in some of the highlights, if you will, the more touristic highlights. We're going to go to Chiang Kai-shek Memorial. Chiang Kai-shek, of course, was the sort of the founder, if you will, of Taiwan. And so he is revered in this city, and they've built an incredible memorial center to him that is really a must-see. We're going to go up Taipei 101 while we're in this area as well. At one time, it was the tallest building in the world, not, of course, the tower, because, of course, that was the CN Tower, all of which have since been eclipsed by bigger buildings in Asia. And then we're going to visit the National Palace Museum, which has hundreds of thousands of very cool ancient Chinese artifacts dating back to the Ming and Jing and Qing sort of dynasties. Fascinating stuff, and a full day, but nevertheless one that you'll immediately sort of get that the feel of the city, the feel of Taiwan, and that the Chinese influence there. And of course, we know that Taiwan is Chinese, and in fact 98% of the population are not ethnic Taiwanese. They've only got about 500,000 of the original Taiwanese indigenous people left in the country. The vast majority have obviously come in from China from decades past. But of course, the pride of the Taiwanese people, and you see it, how they're standing up to China in this sort of geopolitical games that are going on right now. It's immediately apparent from the people. They're quite different to their colleagues from the mainland. If anything, you find that the dynamic is a little bit more like Hong Kong. So we're also going to take a day across the country, as you will have seen from the map that I showed at the beginning. We're going to go by so-called HRS train. That's their high-speed train in Taiwan, very similar to the bullet train that you'll find in Japan. We can cross the whole country from the north tip to the south tip. It's about 300 kilometers in just about an hour and a half. And we arrive into the beautiful city of Kaohsiung. And in Kaohsiung, we're going to, when we leave the railway station, which is super modern building in and of itself, we're immediately going to see what they call the Moon World Badlands. So you get to see some of the outskirts of the city, which is a very unique geological formation. If you think about the Badlands in the US, it kind of is reminiscent of that. We're going to visit the largest monastery in Taiwan. That's actually what's pictured here. A phenomenal facility. And again, you can't help but to be taken aback by the sort of the architectural marvel that it is, but also the devotion of the reverence of the Buddhist culture, Buddhist religion that's there. It's really, really quite amazing. And another highlight for that day will be the dragon and tiger pagodas, beautifully colorful pagodas that are in a different part of the city that we get to walk out into over the water. Really very cool. And we'll end up with a little boat ride in the River of Love, which is the one that passes through Kaohsiung. And by the end of the afternoon, we hop back on the HRS train. 300 kilometers later, we'll be back at our hotel comfortably in time for dinner in Taipei. So it's, this is one of those days where the journey is more than half the fun, because I think that we're not accustomed to high-speed rail travel in Canada. And so being able to do it in Taiwan, as we will also do in Japan, is really quite a treat. Our next day in Taiwan will be all about the flavors. So it'll be like the foodie tour. We're going to go out and take a bit of a step into street food. We're going to learn how some of these things are prepared. And once again, we're going to make sure that you try some of these different things. The sizes, the shapes, the colors will be unfamiliar to you, and some things I'm certain you won't like, but I think there's many other things that you'll say, that's an interesting, unique taste. I wouldn't necessarily order it every day, but this is part of the beauty, particularly of traveling in East Asia, is that, their sense of cuisine is so entirely different from what ours is. And although in general on this trip, we're going to sort of mix up, so you're not going to have only Chinese food in Taiwan, and you're not going to have only Japanese food in Japan. It's one of the improvements that we've made on our trips, because we know there's only so much of this cuisine that one really wants to take and still enjoy the holidays. So, but as I say, we will definitely take a little deeper dive into the local street food, which is a big part of the culture there. And in the afternoon, we're going to visit the Dadaodeng, which is the oldest district in Taiwan. So in Taipei, and that'll give you a flavor of where the city sort of came from 100 years and more ago. And I think that will, yeah, all in all, make for a really nice day. The last day in Taiwan will be, again, completely free. If you're somebody that loves to see these colorful temples, you could spend days just visiting the different golden temples and pagodas and so on and so forth that exist. You might want to head to the outskirts of the city. You can even take a day tour that takes you up into the mountains that are not far outside of Taipei. Or you might just want to run, or just take the time to meander around the downtown part of the city, Xinyi, the neighborhood you're in, and do a bit of shopping, because for those that are going to complete the trip and head back to Canada, it'll be the last and perhaps best opportunity to buy a bunch of stuff. Electronics here, of course, is something a lot of people like to stick in their bags for the way home. And we'll round off the whole thing with a wonderful Taiwanese banquet dinner before flying out the next day, either back home or to our ongoing destination. So I hope that gives you a bit of a flavor of what the trips are all about. Of course, the details are in the updated Japan brochure, which has the detailed program as well as the pricing and the inclusions. So for the South Korea portion, just to give you the sense here, we're looking at $2,500 double occupancy, and actually quite a reasonable single occupancy price for those traveling on their own, and similar, a little bit more. I was happy that we were able to keep these prices as reasonable as we could, considering that particularly in Taiwan, we found that prices have gone, wow, they're up a good 20% from where they were before the pandemic. So nevertheless, I think it represents quite good value. Inclusions, as you see here, we've got these lovely hotels. We've got transportation cards for the free days. We've got breakfast every day. We've got some wonderful English-speaking local guides, and some terrific other lunches and dinners that we'll do along the way. That's both in Taipei as well as in Seoul. And again, details you can find in the brochure. And apart from that, as I say, the only thing that's extra is airfare, which of course you can link this all together. So you can do your trip from Canada to Seoul, and then do the local hops from Seoul to Tokyo, and then Tokyo to Taipei, and then do what we call an open jaw, fly back from Taipei to Canada. Doesn't really make a huge impact on the airfare. Taipei is a little further away, so that adds a little bit to the price, but it should all sort of fall into range, I expect. And again, the jury's a little bit out for next year where the prices are going to come in at, because not all of the Trans-Pacific air routes are operating again. But you should be hopefully in around these ranges here for economy class airfare from Canada to any of these cities, be it Seoul, Tokyo, or Taipei. Good. So I think that covers off most of the details. Time for Q&A. And I'm going to jump the gun because I've once again, I didn't talk about the weather, but of course we're traveling in May, which is pretty much the perfect time because these countries get pretty warm if you get further into the summertime. And similarly, Korea is quite chilly in winter. So I think May is the optimal season. You're probably going to have temperatures in Korea that are going to be definitely in the around the 20 to 25 degrees in early May. That could be a little bit cooler during the day, certainly in the evening. Taipei will be warmer for sure. It's probably going to be in the mid-20s by this time in May, maybe even a little bit warmer. So, rain is a possibility anytime, but it's it's not generally super rainy in May. So Paula, if the weather question was there, then I jumped the gun on that one.
No, all good. I'm having issues putting anything in the chat box. So if anyone else is as well, be sure to enter in. Yeah, it says that I can only send it to hosts and panel, like to us internally. So if anyone else is having an issue, you can use the Q&A box to enter your questions because I haven't had anything come in.
Okay. Well, that's fine. Maybe that means we've addressed all the questions, but I'm sure you must have some. We try to be very thorough in our materials, whether it's the actual main program itinerary itself. We also have an additional information document that we send you if you together with the booking form if you're interested. So that will cover off a lot of the other questions that you might have. But of course, we're always here. If you do have any questions, just drop us a note. I'll go back to that page. I think in the meantime, most everyone knows how to reach us by email, by phone, that's the best way to get a hold of us. And we're happy to answer any questions. And I guess if no other questions came in, then we can wrap up. I said it would take 20 minutes. Oh, it's been 28. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it today. I always enjoy presenting this stuff. I love these places. And we will catch up with you soon. And in our newsletter this week will be our upcoming webinar dates. So stay tuned for that. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy summer. And I'm certainly enjoying it here. And we'll see you all very soon, probably in about a week or two's time. Take care. Have a great day.